Today's topic when it comes to evolution is no longer the supporting evidence of evolution, but rather theories of evolution. In other words, in the topics that we've talked about up to this point, hopefully you have seen the evidence that suggests that yes, living things have changed over time and that all living things are related. The idea now becomes how? How does this happen? One of the names that you're probably familiar with when it comes to evolution is the name Charles Darwin. And many people mistakenly think that Charles Darwin came up with the idea of evolution, that he came up with the idea that life had changed and that living things are related. Well, no, there were people well before Darwin that believed in that idea, but what people couldn't figure out was how did it happen? One of the people that believed in this idea and developed his own theory on the how of evolution was this gentleman named Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck. Lamarck's theory can be boiled down to two basic ideas here if we're going to really simplify things. Lamarck believed in the use and disuse of body parts and the inheritance of acquired traits. What that means in terms of the use and disuse is that he believed that if an organism used a particular part of their body frequently, it would develop, it would grow. And conversely, if they didn't use a particular part of their body very frequently, it would wither away or get smaller. Okay, so use something and it gets bigger, don't use something and it gets smaller. Right away, you can see that, okay, there's maybe something to that. If we think of our muscles, the more we use our muscles, the larger they get. The less we use them, the more they atrophy, the more they get smaller. But then start to think of some other body parts. Your ears. If you listen to things a lot, do your ears get bigger? Your eyes. We look at things all day, but our eyes aren't bulging out of our head. They're not getting bigger. So right away, Lamarck's theory had some problems. Part two of things here is really where they fall down a lot. The inheritance of acquired traits. What that statement is trying to tell you is that once you changed your body, in other words, if you used a body part and it got bigger, or you didn't use a body part and it got smaller, and then you had children, you would pass on those changed traits. Lamarck didn't fare too well in terms of the long-lasting effects of his theory. But we do bring him up today simply to compare and contrast to somebody who seemingly did get it right. And of course, I am referring to Charles Darwin. Darwin lived back in the 1800s. The story goes that he sort of had a revelation as he was serving as a naturalist on a boat that was making a round-the-world journey between 1831 and 1836. And he eventually, when he got back home, started to sort out his ideas on the changing of life and the relatedness of life, and documented his thoughts in a book called On the Origin of Species, published in 1859, where he laid out his basic idea of how evolution occurred. And we're going to try to take that whole book and boil it down to some very basic ideas. 4 big points of Darwin's theory. Number 1, variety exists within species due to mutations and sexual reproduction. In other words, we have a genetic code, and sometimes mistakes are made in that genetic code, thus mutations, but those mutations add variety. Sexual reproduction also, bringing together the sperm and the egg, is bringing together a combination of genes, a combination of traits that perhaps never existed before and is unique. So variety exists within the different individuals of a species. Point number 2, there are limited natural resources. So there's only so much food, water, shelter, etc. to go around. It's not infinite, it is finite. All of that becomes very important for step number 3 here. There are more individuals born each year than can be sustained by those limited natural resources. Okay, so points 1, 2, and 3 here all kind of set everything up. Everybody's a little bit different. There is variety. There are natural resources, which all living things need to live. And there's only so many of them. And there's not enough. There are more individuals born than can be sustained by those natural resources. So points 1, 2, and 3 really set up the clincher, which is number 4. Individuals born with advantageous variations, in other words, individuals born with traits that are helpful, will outcompete others for those limited natural resources. In other words, they're going to get the food, the water, and the shelter because they were lucky enough to be born differently than others. They were born with traits that gave them an advantage in trying to acquire those limited natural resources. Because they got those resources, they lived, and perhaps lived for a long time. And the bonus is that because they lived, and they lived for a long time, they had the chance to reproduce, and perhaps reproduce a lot. And with that reproduction, they in turn then passed on the traits which made them superior. So over the course of many generations, a species can change. Now, a very key point here is individuals do not evolve. Individuals do not change. You are born with your genes, therefore you are born with your traits, and you will die with those same genes and those same traits. So what is evolution? Evolution is the changing of the group, the changing of the species. The classic example here of explaining Darwin's theory would be that of the giraffe. If we go back to Lamarck and apply his ideas to the giraffe, we would say, or he would say, okay, there is the use and disuse of body parts. A giraffe eats leaves. A giraffe is going to try to then each day get a meal by reaching up for those leaves. And it's going to eat the leaves at the bottom of the trees first. But then it's going to have to stretch and crane its neck day after day after day to reach the leaves that are a little bit higher. And so over the course of a lifetime, that giraffe, through the use of that body part, will grow. The neck will grow. And then when that giraffe gives birth, the baby giraffe will be born with a longer neck. Now, that's not how Darwin would explain things. Instead, Darwin would say, okay, variety exists. In other words, not all giraffes are the same. Now, imagine giraffes with short necks, but not all the same length. Some are a little bit taller or longer than others. Others are a little bit shorter. There are limited natural resources. There's only so many leaves to go around. And when the leaves at the bottom of the tree are eaten, well, they're gone. And therefore, the ones that are a little bit higher are those that are left. So there are more giraffes than can be sustained by the leaves that are available. If there's plenty of leaves to go around, then this doesn't work. But if there's only so many leaves and the giraffes are competing for them, well, who's going to win? Well, it's the giraffe that's a little bit taller. Might just be a couple of inches, but those inches allow for that individual to get leaves when others could not. Those others will die from starvation. The slightly taller giraffe will live and will reproduce with another slightly taller giraffe because that's who's available. And then it's possible that when they have a baby giraffe that's just a little bit taller than they were. And so if you play that out over the course of many, many, many generations, over the course of time, the species, not the individual, will change and it will have a longer neck. Two key phrases that go along with Darwin's theory would be that of natural selection, as in nature selects who lives and who dies. Those that live pass on their traits. Those that die take their inferior traits with them. And the other phrase that goes neatly along with that is the phrase survival of the fittest. It basically means the same thing. Which traits does an individual have? Those that are the fittest, those that allow for survival, will survive and pass on those traits and ultimately change the species for the better. Now, a very key thing to mention along with all of this is the idea that all of this is contextual. When we say that nature selects the superior trait or survival of the individuals with the best traits or the fittest traits, well, that depends very much on the environment that one lives in. A thick fur coat is great if you're in cold weather, but it's awful if you're in hot weather. So everything is based on context. Nature selects who lives and who dies, and therefore directs the idea of how species change over time.